So this is every war crime explained, and
Every war crime
let's see.
explained. There's an old saying that
Let's
goes,
see what
all
it
is
says.
fair in love crime explained.
Disclaimer: This video discusses serious subject matters and may not be suitable for all audiences. This video mentions war, loss of life, and crime in an educational, non-incentive, and non-explosive way. This video has been carefully made to strictly adhere to all of YouTube's community guidelines and evaluation standards. This video does qualify for any and all EDSA exemptions. Viewer discretion is advised. So, for anybody out there who isn't comfortable with this stuff, I'd advise clicking off. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for coming now. But yeah.
There's an old saying that goes, all is fair in love and war. But I would argue that saying is totally and utterly wrong. And unless you would consider breaking up a happy family to get the girl of your dreams, or killing innocent civilians to satisfy your political means as fair, then I would imagine you would agree. And
Nah, nah. All is fair between love and war. How do I feel? I don't know. Like, I feel like if you love somebody, you would do anything in your power for them. But there's certain extents that I don't think many people would go against. So that's saying, while it may hold true to some people, I don't think it holds true to me, and I don't think it holds true to many of you, especially in the aspects of war. And nowadays, we really don't gain much from war. It's these big leaders trying to claim more power for themselves. Just hungry men, and I don't know. I don't know if I'm happy with how the world is, but yeah.
in that case, I think the fact that there is literally things that are legal and illegal in war bolsters my theory. And also brings
Yeah, that was always something for me, bro. Knowing that something's illegal in war, bro, like it's a war. Who's gonna stop you? If you win the war doing illegal things, you win the war. Like it's interesting how there's legal things, illegal things, and who's there to like enforce these actions, right? Like think about it. These countries come together and make these laws, but if somebody breaks them, who's going to enforce them? The other countries, yeah. But if they just like say it's something like America, like a huge country, or Russia or China, if they break any war crime law they want, who's gonna stop them, right? They're huge countries, so like that being a thing is like it's so like unstable. It's so I don't know the word for it, but it's yeah.
us to the point of today's video. War undoubtedly is one of the most hellish experiences available on Earth. And somewhat paradoxically, war has its own code of ethics. Now, whether or not these codes
Yeah,
are
that's
actually
crazy.
followed or not depends. Regardless, there are some acts, weapons, and strategies that are considered simply too cruel for war. And in today's video, I'm going to describe in detail every single thing that is banned or illegal in war, starting with the earliest recorded examples of war crimes and ending in the current standards for ethical warfare, aka everything that is considered a war crime. Let's begin. Ancient rules of war. With how brutal day-to-day life was thousands of years ago, it's almost hard to imagine how brutal war must have been in that time period. However, believe it or not, even in some of the earliest civilizations, the concept of ethical war and war crimes was present, albeit in a rather rudimentary way.
Yeah, I think like especially for Japanese people, that was like a big thing for them, wasn't it? Like samurais had like their the fundamentals they stuck to their own beliefs, right? They would rather kill themselves like by committing seppuku than what's it called? Like betray people or do something. I don't know, it's interesting how even back then with how humans are, right? Such stingy creatures, such evil creatures, not evil by heart, but just evil by thought, can even this far back create war crimes. Like, yeah. Sorry if I'm not that entertaining, but
Now, it's important
thank
to
you.
note that the term war crime has really only existed since the 1800s, although the concept of rules in warfare predates that by thousands of years, and actually has set the foundation for modern war crimes and war standards today. I'm going to keep this section brief, although I did want to quickly mention a few interesting and unique war crimes from a handful of different ancient civilizations. Starting in ancient India, going back all the way to roughly 600 BCE, ancient Indian texts proved that there was a code of conduct when it came to warfare, and this
That's
code of
interesting.
conduct was known as the Dharma Yuddha, essentially translating to righteous warfare. The principles of the Dharma
Damn.
Yuddha were meant to be taken as law, and it was said that breaking these rules during warfare would result in moral consequences. And the rules stated in the Dharma Yuddha are the
Damn, that's interesting, huh? So these people back then really just believed that committing these war crimes would lead them to internal suffering or punishment after death. Like even if they won the war, they gained nothing because of the punishment they'd receive. That's crazy to think about. That, like, because of course humans can enforce these laws, right? But to have someone like God be a fear factor for them, it's interesting.
following. Firstly, equal fights only. And what this meant was that chariots were only meant to attack chariots, and one soldier could only attack one soldier. If there was a battle taking place, the battle was meant to be fair. Secondly, no attacking sleeping, retreating, or surrendering soldiers. And on top of this, you may also not harm unarmed women, children, elderly people, or disabled people. The third law of the Dharma Yuddha states that combat begins after sunrise and ends after sunset. And the fourth law states that there may be no poisoned, barbed, or hidden weapons used in warfare. And finally, surrendered enemy soldiers must be protected and treated as prisoners of war. And wounded enemies who surrender to you must be treated and cared for. During 5th
Wow, think about that. There's so many laws that we still see today that go back that far. Like just with the just bringing on the topic of like treating enemy soldiers who are injured or wounded. Like even nowadays, like if we take them in, treat them, whether we imprison them or not, we take them in, treat them. Like it's crazy to think even back then when we were such ruthless creatures that we were doing such acts.
century BCE in ancient China, they too had their own code of conduct when it came to warfare, with some of the most notable examples being the following. Firstly, no attacking unready enemies. This would essentially eliminate sneak attacks or ambushes.
Yeah, that kind of falls into like even the samurai I think I was talking about, where it's like, you know how samurais like were very like respectful for their battles, very respectful. So sneak attack would be like seen as almost like a sin. I don't know if that makes sense. I don't know if that makes sense. But you guys know what I mean. Like it'd be seen as a sin. It'd be seen as the incorrect thing to do. The Not the way to live the life of a samurai. So it's interesting in China, these following neighborhoods, they often share the same laws. Like even though they live so many miles, thousands of miles apart, with borders, with countries, with separation, that they had these similar ideologies. It's almost like the human species just follows the same trend line no matter where we are in the world. Like whether it be on the left side, the right side, we're all humans, and so we end up following the same strategies, the same trend lines.
Secondly, you were not to take advantage of fleeting or surrendering enemies in distress, meaning that if there is an enemy that is retreating or simply unoffensively tending to his own wounds, you may not take advantage of that situation, and ideally you would offer them help if they are truly surrendering. Interestingly, it
Yeah,
was
see,
also around
the
this
same as
time when
India.
Sun Tzu's
Interesting.
book The Art of War was released. And in it, he emphasized the importance of strategy over brutality in warfare, and suggested focusing on subduing power players to avoid excessive destruction in cities. Now, while this may seem noble and ahead of
Yeah, see, no, I think that was really mainly because like they wanted to capture this land. They didn't want to destroy it. So it made sense to take out the most powerful person, claim the land for yourself, and then just raking in the money, right? From this land, from all this stuff. Yeah, it's interesting.
its time, it's important to note that this wasn't a humanitarian play. This was simply an example of high leverage strategies to be used ideally in war. This doesn't mean that they would be against brutality if strategy didn't work. The teachings just advised trying to use strategy when possible. Okay, quickly putting history and crime to the side for just a moment, I wanted to ask, have you been putting off making a doctor's appointment even though you know
Alright, is it an ad? Just gonna skip this. I'm sorry. Sorry for skipping your ad, man, but
you get appointments
that's
fast? Typically, and start getting the care you took a time.
damn.
Now, let's get back to it. And finally, during the 8th century BCE in ancient Greece, there was a set of customary rules known as the common laws of the Hellenes when it came to warfare. And these laws were the following. If you are to partake in war, an official declaration is required. If a war is ongoing, you still must respect sacred truces. And one example of this would be the Olympic Games. Thirdly, if you were in possession of dead enemies, you had to return them if requested. And finally,
Wow.
you may not mutilate enemy corpses, as it was considered barbaric. Now, a couple of notes about these Greek rules specifically. For starters, these were not necessarily written, followed rules. These were actually unwritten customs that were, well, customary and agreed upon across different Greek
Interesting.
city-states. And it's important to note that these rules specifically applied to inter-Greek conflicts, with the sole goal of limiting brutality when it comes to Greek-on-Greek violence and warfare. With that being said, that means that these rules did not apply to non-Greek barbarians, meaning that if you were a Greek soldier fighting a non-Greek soldier, all of these rules were out of the window. And even if you were a Greek soldier fighting a different Greek soldier, because enforcement was so weak on these rules, and this was more or less of a gentleman's agreement, having these rules be followed was, well, on a case-by-case basis, to say the least. But now that we are armed with ancient historical context when it comes to rules of war and war crimes, I want to jump directly to the establishment of the modern war crime to describe exactly how war crimes came to be in the first place and how the term war crime evolved from its establishment in the roughly 1800s to the modern day, the Lieber Code. As we've discussed so far in this video, throughout history, there have been countless cultures with countless different customs or rules or gentlemen's agreements when it comes to warfare. But it wasn't until 1863, with the establishment of the Lieber Code, that there was ever one formalized, codified system that sought to govern and be the official law when it came to war. Francis Lieber was born in 1798 in Berlin, and as a young adult, Francis was exposed to the horrors of war. He first fought for Prussia in the Napoleonic Wars, and then later fought in the Greek War of Independence less than a decade later. Fortunately, Francis survived both of these wars, and ended up moving to America and became an academic. He worked in the University of South Carolina as a tenured professor for both history and political economy. And it was actually at this job where he met Major General Henry W. Halleck. And shortly after becoming professionally acquainted, Francis was commissioned by this Major General to write the first instructions for the government of the armies of the United States in the field, aka the General's Orders 100, aka the Lieber Code. And the initial purpose of the Lieber Code was to be the military law that governed the actions of the Union Army during the Civil War. Now, this was no small task. Francis Lieber was literally just asked to make the rules of war for an entire army based off of basically all of the customs of war to ever exist. And while this job may seem daunting, he was the perfect man for the job, as he had both war experience, law experience, and political experience. And what he presented to the American government at the time not only went on to shape the Civil War, but also served as the basis for other warfare-related laws that came later down the line. One notable example being the Geneva Convention, which we're going to discuss soon. Now,
Yeah, the Geneva Convention was actually pretty insane. I remember learning about that last year, and even some part of this year in school. Yeah, even the Berlin, I don't know what was the Berlin meeting. Uh, Whatever that was. Sorry, it's not off the top of my head right now. I think like all these powerful countries had to get together to form rules, laws, just because of the chaotic situation going up in the world. It's something, man. It's something. But to think that we actually did come together and do this just shows that we're resilient. And honestly, I think we could do much more. It's just there's no urgency for it. There's no need for it. And so we don't. I think like we definitely need to work on that.
with that being said, let's dive into exactly what the Lieber Code suggests should and shouldn't be allowed in war. Now, it's important to note that the Lieber Code literally has 157 articles, which is why I'm going to discuss the main points specifically pertaining to war crimes, or what should not be allowed in war. According to the Lieber Code, the following acts are either admissible under military necessity or outright forbidden in any context, and they go as follows. Firstly, and kind of ironically, the first thing that is prohibited is cruelty, which to me sounds like a complete oxymoron, saying that cruelty is banned in war. But in the context of the Lieber Code, it is suggested that the infliction of suffering for the sake of suffering or revenge is unnecessary. And how this could look on the battlefield is if your goal is to kill your enemy, you may do so effectively and quickly. However, if you are intentionally doing it in a slow or cruel way, potentially injuring non-vital limbs, that could be considered intentional cruelty and be punishable by death according to the Lieber Code. There's quite a few things that are considered war crimes under the Lieber Code, so for the rest of these, I'm going to kind of go rapid fire. Other notable acts that are considered war crimes under the Lieber Code are as follows. Torturing enemy soldiers, including to extort them for confessions. Using poison in any way. Any act of hostility that makes returning to peace
Using poison, is tear gas technically considered poison? Like I know it's a gas, but would that be like a war crime? Just because I know tear gas was involved in a bunch of wars. I'm not sure which ones, obviously. If I did, I could have told you guys. But yeah. Stuff like tear gas, like poison is like stuff you consume. But I wonder if like poisonous gas counts, especially if like it's targeted to civilians, right?
Unnecessarily difficult. Destruction of property that is not commanded by an authorized officer. Robbery.
See, now that's interesting with how stuff is going on in Israel, Palestine, with the US versus them, right? How they're just dropping bombs on civilians, on terrorists, which makes sense, but civilians, which is unnecessary. So many people are being hurt. And the fact, like, they set these laws, but are they really following them? Like, we gotta dig in. Anyways, I'm yapping too much. We gotta focus.
Specifically stealing private items off of enemy soldiers, rape of any kind, wounding, maiming, or killing civilians, committing any crime against civilians, including arson, murder, robbery, fraud, or forgery, killing prisoners of war, racially discriminating prisoners of war, and firing upon outposts, sentinels, or pickets. Now, even with that small bit of context, it's easy to understand that the core purpose of the Lieber Code was to minimize cruelty and prolonged suffering as much as possible within the context of war. And with the Lieber Code literally being the first draft ever made in the context of war crimes and international humanitarian law, it's truly not a bad first draft, especially for being made by one guy. And the Lieber Code was thought to be so fair and so revolutionary at the time that on April 24th, 1863, President Abraham Lincoln himself issued the Lieber Code to be the official binding military law for the Union Army throughout the American Civil War. And while the Lieber Code initially had a very niche application, at least in a global context, it would soon go on to become the global standard when it comes to humanitarian law during warfare, as well as the global governing law when it comes to war crimes. But with that being said, the Lieber Code was the first ever formal recognition and establishment of what war crimes were and consisted of, although these rules only applied to one army for one war, and did not become federal or international law until later, which brings us to our next section.
Damn, so this guy back in the 1800s with no clue, with not just the past knowledge, bro, created one of the most used laws in history, bro. Think about today's generation. Do you think any of us could do that? Do you genuinely think there's some of us out there who would be able to create such a perfect piece of document? There's so many, like, because we just have so many opinions. We have so many controversial takes nowadays, that I think even creating something like that wouldn't even be possible for most of us, especially without AI. Like, try to do without AI. I think a bunch of us could do it with AI. Just fully ethical, no personal judgment, no nothing. Without AI, do you think any of us could actually do it? You gotta think about that.
The Hague Conventions. Following the end of the American Civil War, the concept of federal or potentially even international laws regarding war became a popular thought experiment among political figures, military strategists, and academics alike. And it was for this reason that the Hague Conventions were established. The Hague Conventions were a series of international treaties and declarations negotiated in both 1988 and 1907 at two different peace conferences in the Netherlands. And the Hague Conventions were the precursor to the famous Geneva Conventions, which we'll get into next. But the Hague Conventions are extremely important in the context of war crimes because just like the Lieber Code was the first ever recognized law for warfare, the Hague Conventions was the first ever international law when it came to war crimes, and laws of war. And
Damn, so this was like the first ever like what is it called? Like the group of NATO, right? Damn, this is like the first NATO style thing that ever happened. But this was so late on in the world. We could have had something like this way before. We could have stopped multiple racial problems that we've had in the war, multiple sexist problems. But I mean it's good that we've eventually started. It's interesting to see the participants of this. It looks mainly as like just Caucasian people, which is like probably like it's good, but whatever this convention formed, the international laws in detail, they would just wouldn't hold up in today's world.
as I stated earlier, the Lieber Code was a massive influence on the Hague Conventions, although the two are not identical, with the Hague Conventions affirming the Lieber Code but also adding the following. And just for context, I'm going to be combining both Hague Conventions into one, because the 1899 and the 1907 Hague Conventions are both similar. The 1907 Hague Conventions were just a revision of the original. So for that reason, I'm just going to combine them here. With that being said, notable new war crimes include killing or wounding an enemy who has laid down his arms or no longer has a means of defense, improper.
Wow, so you can surrender in war nowadays. See, so many things that I just don't know that I just learned from watching this video. Oh, it's crazy. So if I sign up, go to war, just throw my gun. They can't kill me, huh?
Using national flags, military insignias, or military uniforms, using bullets which expand or flatten easily in the human body, attacking or bombarding towns, villages, dwellings, or buildings that are undefended, looting towns that are occupied, declaring no mercy or refusing surrender, forcing civilians in occupied territories to give up information about their country's army or its means of defense, collective punishments for acts of individuals, general destruction or pillaging of private property unless demanded by military necessity, attacking hospital ships or medical personnel, not respecting neutral powers and territories, and automatic submarine contact mines must not become indiscriminate hazards after control is lost. Which I have no idea how you would even go about, well, collecting mines in an area you've already lost. Like, if the mines are there and then you've lost control of the area or the mine itself, I don't know how you're going to make it indiscriminate. If a contact mine comes in contact, it's going off. But regardless, the Hague Conventions were groundbreaking when it came to international humanitarian and warfare law. It also made some interesting changes when it came to warfare in general, like the addition of laws pertaining to naval warfare. But of course, the establishment of war crimes did not end with the Hague Conventions, which leads us to our next and likely most famous conventions, the Geneva Conventions. Here we
Yeah,
are.
this is what I was talking about. The Geneva Convention, which I mentioned before. I think this definitely helped shape the world to come to what it is today, but there's just so many more improvements that we can do that these leaders don't consider. And obviously, I'm not in a position of power where I understand what's going on with the world, but I think like the US military, Canadian military, Mexico military, all these North American militaries, they just like they dump money into their systems, but they have so much money that even if they subsidize a small amount for their people, for other people, for the world, they could change the world. But no, we need to set up foundations like Team Trees from Mr. Beast or Team Wells that he's also done, or even other stuffs like GoFundMe. We have to fund these. Yeah, they receive government funding, but it's government has so much money that they could have easily solved these problems if they came together. But no, the people have to pay for it. After the people already pay tax, they pay everything. We don't get a choice in how it's invested properly. And it all comes down to how we choose our government, but we can't change that. And, I don't want to get into the politics of things, but
That's right, which you've all been waiting for. The most famous and also most recent adaptation of the list of actions that are considered war crimes, as well as other codes of conduct when it comes to warfare and humanitarian stuff. The Geneva Conventions of 1949 are the most famous Geneva Conventions and consist of 4 different treaties. These 4 treaties consist of previous Geneva Conventions. Interestingly, the Geneva Conventions actually date back to the 1860s, predating the Hague Conventions, but that initial Geneva Convention really only focused on one thing, and I figured I would put all of the Geneva Conventions together and chronologically time it with the 1949 Geneva Conventions because that's where it really became its final form, so to speak. If you're unfamiliar, the Geneva Convention itself is the core of all modern international humanitarian law, or IHL, and its sole goal is to protect the victims of armed conflicts. The Geneva Conventions of 1949 were, of course, a byproduct of the end of the Second World War, where many crimes against humanity and war crimes were committed. And on top of the Geneva Conventions,
well, I mean, yeah, like after you look at World War One, where Germany was subsidized to like almost having no way to survive. They took away everything from Germany, set off tariffs, taxes so high, they had no way to survive. Germany had to respond. And with World War II, I didn't say anything they do is good. I don't support what Germany did, right? There should have been other means to go around that. But it led to what happened, and now the world had to experience that. So the Geneva Convention, like, it's sad that it had to come in due to factors such as that. But it's a good thing it's come in since then we haven't seen anything major other than like Israel, Palestine, Ukraine, Russia. I don't know about any other ongoing wars, but yeah, I think just the US just has too much play in political power right now, and they cause too much threat and violence. There's ways to dispel this violence, slow it down. But yeah. it's not something I can do. So
In 1949, we also saw the establishment of the Nuremberg Principles, which isn't worth its own section, but essentially the Nuremberg Principles were created
the Nuremberg. Nuremberg's. I'm not sure. I think I've heard of the Nuremberg, like the Nuremberg racing track, but I think Nuremberg might just be like a city, and so it might be based off that. Sorry for interrupting, guys, but yeah.
not necessarily to define war
I mean,
crimes,
that's what
but
I'm
to
here for.
ensure war crimes were punished. And because there was a lot of Nazi Party members after World War II who committed war crimes, the International Law Commission and United Nations saw it was vital that they created the Nuremberg Principles to ensure all of these guilty individuals did not escape punishment. To put it briefly, the
That's good.
Nuremberg Principles basically state that anybody who commits a war crime is, well, a war criminal. And most importantly, anybody who commits a war crime is subject to penalty at an international level with international law. And internal
I think my question is gonna be answered now, like who enforces this stuff that I asked at the start.
laws of a country cannot impede or override this international law. Essentially meaning that if you were a Nazi general who committed a war crime, the German government could not change their local laws to get you off of the hook for this war crime, because the war crime or international law supersedes the national law. And on top of this, the Nuremberg Principles also ensured that political status did not relieve the war criminal of their punishment, which is important. But yeah, that's basically the Nuremberg Principles, just ensuring that the laws were actually taken seriously and enforced. But back to the Geneva Conventions. The first Geneva Convention was actually introduced, like I mentioned, in 1864, and was specifically aimed at creating rules around the treatment of sick and wounded armed forces on the battlefield. The second Geneva Convention actually replaced the Hague Convention of 1907, and essentially contained everything from the first Geneva Convention and the Hague Conventions. The third Geneva Convention was focused on the treatment of war prisoners and replaced the previous Geneva Convention, and the fourth and final Geneva Convention is the one we're discussing now, which is basically the all-encompassing Geneva Convention. Now, with all of this being said, before I say Geneva Convention for the millionth time,
I just remembered. I was talking about the Treaty of Versailles that saved like the Africans and what happened in Africa with the land distributions and the fights and everything and like the seizure of land and how everybody was just enslaved. The Treaty of Versailles is what I was referring to then. And yeah, I just remembered it right now.
let me explain some of the newest additions introduced with the Geneva Conventions. Once again, this list includes introductions from all of the Geneva Conventions, dating from the 1860s to the 1940s. The Geneva Gas Protocol states that the use of any asphyxiating, poisonous, or other gases and
Damn, this guy's answering all my questions.
biological warfare methods are strictly prohibited and considered war crimes. Torture, inhumane treatments, including biological experiments, are also war crimes. Compelling a prisoner of war or other protected person, like civilians, to serve in the forces of a hostile power is a war crime. Depriving a prisoner of war or enemy civilian of their rights and a regular trial is a war crime. And instead of just repeating myself and saying everything's a war crime, everything I'm about to say is a war crime. Taking of hostages, unlawful deportation or unlawful confinement, any act that outrages personal dignity, specifically humiliating or degrading treatment of a protected person, any type of violence, murder, or mutilation of a protected person. You must search for, collect, care for, and evacuate without discrimination when it comes to prisoners of war. You must not attack medical transports or facilities. You must not deprive prisoners of war of food, clothing, medical care, and they must not do forced labor in danger.
Wasn't I forgot it was Vietnam when US and Vietnam went to war. The Vietnamese were shooting the medics, weren't they? So the medics were taught to stop wearing the plus on their head. They were just aiming for the medics. So and they started carrying rifles and stopped wearing that. That was so interesting that happened. Even though it was a war crime, I was like, wow, like it's insane that we could do that.
Dangerous or hostile conditions. You must protect one's family's honor and religious practices, and you must not make any indiscriminate attacks. In addition,
Bro, this is literally happening all over Israel, Palestine right now. Like, I'm actually not too tuned into what's going on, but I just know there's major destruction and like this being a war crime. Why haven't we stepped in to stop it? If we are so dedicated to these laws, why is nobody stepping in to stop it? Why is nothing going on?
in addition to these, you cannot use human shields, you cannot attack cultural objects or monuments, you cannot intentionally starve civilians as a method of warfare, and you cannot attack undefended or demilitarized zones. And this, of course, is also in addition to all of the other previous laws and rules I suggested. That is, after the ancient ones. The ancient ones don't apply here. But yeah, once again, I'm sure you can see another common theme amongst all of these codes and conventions. The underlying thesis is that these rules are supposed to prohibit unnecessary suffering across the board and specifically protect non-participants in the war, aka sick, elderly, injured, or civilians. And one of
Makes
the
sense.
biggest changes
Makes
with
sense.
the Nuremberg trials and the Geneva Conventions is the mandate for accountability of people who break these war crimes. But yeah,
Yeah,
if you were
that's
like
good.
me and were shocked when you learned that there was rules to war and
So so then I think whenever this Israel-Palestine stuff ends, whoever's responsible for leading this stuff would be subject to war crimes. But like I don't know. I can't say too much because I don't want to get too political, but there's just some stuff that is currently going on that nobody's being subject to trial, even though there's been evidence being thrown around.
well, a lot of them, you were probably also super shocked when you learned that, according to Geneva Conventions, if you come across enemy soldiers that are surrendering to you or injured, you have to essentially take care of them and treat them as one of your own, which is something I did not know at all. And while I'm curious how much
Wow.
this is actually well honored, it is nice to see that there is at least rules in place to take care of your fellow human, even in some of the most hellish.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it, your fellow human. Because at the end of the day, borders are just lines, and we're all just people. So if somebody was just happened to be born on one side of the line, and you're born on one side of the line, and you're fighting now, there's no reason to discriminate against him. It wasn't his fault. It wasn't your fault. It's the people above. All you can do is protect and help.
And disgusting conditions ever imaginable. But with that, ladies and gentlemen, there you have it. If you were to ask what constitutes a war crime, the informed answer would be that depends, specifically on the culture and the time period. But now that I just said that out loud, I feel like that's kind of a Redditor answer to that question. So let me give you the once and for all conclusive list of major war crimes that exist in the modern day. Willful killing of protected persons, torture or inhumane treatment, willfully causing great suffering or serious injury to protected persons, forcing protected persons to fight against their own side, depriving rights to free trial, unlawful deportation or confinement, taking hostages, directly attacking civilians, indiscriminate attacks, using human shields, using starvation as a method of war, any sort of sexual violence, using soldiers under the age of 15, using banned weapons like poison gas, conducting treacherous acts such as pretending to surrender only to ambush an enemy, declaring no.
Back during the World Wars, weren't there a bunch of Americans who were actually lying about their age? So, like, without verification, how are these people allowed? Like, if you're like 14, 13, 12, to go into war? It's interesting.
Mercy and refusing surrender, pillaging or looting, humiliating or degrading treatment of a
I mean, this was formed after World War II, so yeah.
protected person, including mutilation, environmental warfare, and attacks on peacekeeping or humanitarian missions. And in case you forgot, protected persons basically include civilians, wounded enemies, or prisoners of war, as well as neutral parties and peacekeepers, and others that I'm sure I'm forgetting. But interestingly enough, after looking at different cultures, different eras, and different contexts, it's interesting to see how nearly every treaty or rule or custom we discussed all had the same goal of eliminating unnecessary suffering when possible, almost to
Yeah, yeah.
assume that war may be inevitable. However, while
Yeah, I mean, unless the world is united under one front, right? We go into something what Russia has, where like everybody has the same income. I forgot what that's called. Yeah, I definitely have to do my research before, you know, talking, but I know my knowledge. Anyways, the what Russia has where they give everybody a set income, they give out jobs, they give out everything. Like I think unless we're into something like that, we won't be war free ever, since there's no there's no reason for war. Everybody's the same, everybody's equal. I think as long as we have economic freedom and, you know, like economic disparity mainly, which is I think the cause of almost 99% of wars, there's just no escaping them. If a person's starving, he's going to fight, and you can't stop him from fighting. You can either end him or find a way to make him full.
suffering may be a byproduct, it's a variable that can be minimized and should be if possible, which is kind of a morbid silver lining in this entire situation. But yeah, if you were curious about every war crime, hopefully this video served as a pretty good glimpse into what constitutes
Yeah,
a war
man.
crime and where war crimes
This
even
is a
come
good
from.
video,
I
man.
guess
I'm
it's true
gonna
what they say. War
subscribe and
never
like.
changes.
You guys should
Thank
check
you
them
guys
out.
so much for watching this video. And if you liked this video, check out the video on screen right now. It's a video I made about what war was like in every era of history.
Well, we
It's
could check
very
that out
similar
next
to this
stream.
video, but isn't
That's
necessarily
nice.
focused on war crimes, but rather warfare in general. And if you like this video, you're gonna love that one as well. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. And as always, trust me, bro.
Yeah, man. That was interesting. That was a good video. There's a there's a lot of laws that we've made now, right? That have just grown from previous laws that we've had. But it's interesting to see how in war, in a place where it's just, you know, dog eat dog out there, that we have these laws set up just for the safety of our people, safety of, you know, everybody involved. And yeah. I mean that was my take on it. Thank you guys for tuning in. Thank you guys for checking me out. And I think that's the end of stream for today.